Willkommen zum Podcast Bis zum letzten Atemzug. Ich bin Alexander Berg, Pastor und Gründer der Mosaikkirche wie eine Familie in Erfstadt. Die Idee hinter diesem Podcast ist, Menschen für die Gemeindegründung in Deutschland zu gewinnen und die bereits in diesem Prozess sind, zu ermutigen, weiterzumachen. Aus diesem Grund treffe ich mich mit Gemeindegründern zu einem Interview. Gemeinsam können wir ihre Erfolge feiern und aus ihren Fehlern lernen. Jesus hat versprochen, seine Kirche zu bauen und er tut es immer noch, auch heute, mit den Menschen wie du und ich. Wenn dir dieser Podcast gefällt, dann möchte ich dich darum bitten, es zu abonnieren, zu liken, einen Kommentar zu schreiben oder an deine Freunde weiterzuleiten. Und nun viel Spaß mit der neuen Episode. Willkommen zu unserer nächsten Episode von dem Podcast Bis zum letzten Atemzug. Heute habe ich einen ganz besonderen Gast bei uns. Das ist David Page und ich habe David vor kurzem kennengelernt. Er macht eine großartige Arbeit hier in Deutschland. Sie versuchen Gemeindegründung unter den Flüchtlingen zu starten und ich habe ihn eingeladen. Für viele von euch vielleicht etwas Ungewohntes. David spricht nur Englisch, das heißt, das ganze Interview wird auf Englisch sein und wir werden versuchen, das dann zu übersetzen. Es wird 2 Episoden geben, eine komplett in Englisch und die zweite wird dann mit den deutschen Übersetzungen da sein. Dave.
Yay.
Nice to see you.
It's good to be here.
Thank you for coming.
What a pleasure.
Well, I'm really glad to meet you. We met just a few weeks ago.
We did.
And there's a boundary, right? We like kind of no connectedness.
Yes, that's right.
Not only Jesus, but we love church.
And coffee, evidently. We like coffee too.
Love
We
coffee.
had coffee together.
And yeah, I would love to ask you to introduce yourself.
Yes, sure.
And 3 things I want to know. How do you become a follower of Christ?
Yes.
Why did you decide and how did you decide to be a full-time ministry?
Okay.
Going in full-time ministry. And then mission.
Yep.
How did it
Sure.
happen that you decide to be a missionary?
Yeah.
And then working with Iranian people or people from Iran and Farsi. So that's the 3 things I want to ask.
Yeah, so the first one's easy. I grew up in a Christian home. My parents are strong believers, took us to church, and following Christ seemed to be a natural thing when the gospel is, kind of surrounding you day to day, week to week. And so when I was very young, I began to follow Jesus. And honestly, when you talk about coming into the ministry, I really can't remember a time that I didn't want to be in ministry.
Okay.
Which is interesting. None of my family were in ministry before. And so I just, from very young, from the time I was in middle school, I wanted to do ministry things and was very active in my church. And so my youth minister kind of took me under his wing and taught me and helped me, encourage me. And so really, as far as I can remember, ministry was what I wanted to do. And from the time I graduated from high school, went right into college, studying Bible and really had my ministry idea set from very early on. So I don't know if there wasn't a big moment. It was just kind of a gradual,
Okay. Cool.
a gradual thing. So I served in the United States in pastoral ministry for about 20 years in various capacities. My last time as a pastor was about 10 years in a small West Texas church. And we loved that. And while I was there, we did a mission trip to Romania, and I love the cross-cultural element of that. It was a real blessing to me, and so God began to work on our hearts. Actually, my wife did not want to do that at the beginning. She was a little bit resistant to that, and then we had this great opportunity to go to this big church somewhere and serve, and it was at the same time we were thinking about missions overseas, and I felt strong we should do one thing. Carlos felt strong we should do another thing. And then one night we were talking and it just kind of worked together. And Carlos, I think I'm ready. And so we decided to do it. And we were actually being asked to go overseas. We had a friend who was the leader of a theological school in Portugal,
Okay.
in Lisbon. And he said, would you come and do theological training in our school? And I said, yeah. So we took our 4 kids and we did training. And 3 days, 72 hours before we were to leave, our organization told us you can't go to Europe. And so for a lot of reasons, it was kind of complicated. And so we stepped back, and we asked the question, where is the gospel not? Where is it hardest to manage the gospel? Where is the influence of the gospel the least?
Okay.
And as we began to ask those questions, China, India, and the Persians came up on our radar. And by God's providence, we sat with the leaders of the Persian work, and they said, we need somebody to do theological education. That's one of the missing elements in the work, and we really need you to come and do that. And my wife's a marriage and family therapist, and they said that we need helping our people on the field adjust to living. She has clinical care, clinical therapy, and we need that. And so it was the one group that didn't say, come and join us. It was the one group that said, we need you. We need you and your skills. And so we said, okay. And so we took our 4 kids and spent some time in Cyprus, then in Dubai, and then in Istanbul. And we focused on the country of Iran all that time for about 15 years. And then 4 years ago, there was just an opportunity to bring the work together in the diaspora world. I was only Iran focused at the time, and in this current role, my focus is on Persian work worldwide, and this includes Afghans, which was my first time. So 4 years ago was the first time I was having to also manage a new people group. They speak a similar language, but they're not the same peoples.
Right.
And so I was living in Turkey, and there was a lot of complication to managing this new ministry from an Islamic country. And so Germany afforded me the best opportunity to come and not be under the radar, not be kind of 007, but to kind of live out in the open. And the most gathering of Persians in the world outside of the United States are in Germany. That's the number one refugee diaspora populations here. And so it just seemed to be a great fit. And so we came here.
Okay, I think we need to go a few steps back.
Okay.
Sorry. No, that's great. So you've been pastor for 20 years in the United States.
Yeah.
And then you decided, if I'm correct me, with IMB, International Mission Board.
That's
the
right.
organization.
That's right.
You went,
Yep.
So you decided to go overseas, and you went. Your task was working with people from Iran.
That's right.
All right, but as American,
Yes.
he was not allowed to
Yes.
go into Iran.
That's right. Although we tried, and
believe-
we have
I
other
believe.
stories that
believe.
don't need to be on this podcast.
So so you decided to, and then one thing. I mean, not everybody was asked or would be asked to do a teaching thing.
Right.
It has something with your history as well. You graduated from which seminary?
Southwestern. I have a MDiv, and then went back in '99. Got my DMin.
Which PhD?
A doctor of ministry. Yeah.
Doctor of Ministry. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So that's the point. That's
Yes.
why they ask you, because you have this degree. And
I do,
you know
and
how to
the
teach.
DMin, the degree is in preaching, and so my hope at the time, my goals at the time, were really to be in a large church and to be a person that lives in the pulpit, that its ministry is in the pulpit. I wanted to have a preaching ministry. That was my ambition.
And so they ask you now, okay, come over and
Yes.
teach the Iranian people
Yes.
to do what?
Well, at the time, our focus was on. It was just kind of encouraging development of resources and to equip and help leaders inside the country of Iran. We couldn't go there.
Right.
So normally we would bring them out and into a country that was nearby. We would spend some time with them and then send them back in. And so our relationship was like that. We call it non-residential. We live in one place and then serve somewhere else that's restricted. And so that was our method. When I came on, one of the important tools that I wanted the church to have was, how do you manage the Bible? And there was such a diverse understanding. Hermeneutics, interpretive methods were so diverse, and many of them were unhealthy. And so
I believe.
what I wanted was just to add to the voice of the work. Here's how we understand the Bible, and here's how we teach the Bible, and here's how we make the Bible the foundation of the local church, which was another important thing too, was building up the local church, focusing on the local church. And so when I came into the work, and as I kind of got a feel for what was going on, that's where I landed. And so we would bring them out. I would teach them either the Bible or biblical interpretation or something biblically focused, and then ship them back into the country. And as I went, one of the things that I noticed that was most efficient was a lack of understanding the Old Testament. Right. So you have people that would come to faith and they really understood the Gospels. Man, they knew about Jesus and they read John, and that was very important. But then when you ask, and Psalms, they could read the Psalms too. But when you ask them about the storyline of the Bible, it just wasn't clear. In the Old Testament, they had some very unhealthy views of the Old Testament. And so one of the things early on I decided was I was going to teach the Old Testament as a foundation for the work inside. So rather than starting in the New Testament and just kind of reaching back, we started in the Old Testament, and we would point forward. We'd say, okay, we're going to teach this, and now here's the touch point in the New Testament. We really felt like that was a better model for understanding long-term how to be a healthy church leader, was to be able to use all of the Bible for your study. So that's what I did, and really that's what I still do. I mean, I still love that kind of ministry. So I go back, I do a lot of teaching. And my favorite thing is to get into a room with 12, 14 Iranians, have lots of tea, open the Bible, and just get after it. And it's just a lot of fun.
Cool. Okay. And so then one day, 5 years ago, you decided to come back, or not to come back, but you decided to shift to Europe.
Yes.
And so now you work with people from Afghanistan.
That's right.
People, and
That's
you work with Iranian people,
That's right.
Farsi people.
Yes.
And so somebody told me, introduced you to me, this guy helps churches to start churches with refugees.
Right.
So my first question is, why should we do it?
For one thing, there's the biblical mandate to start churches. I mean,
that's easy. That's too easy.
To be a pretty good Bible answer. I want to qualify your question a bit, because I'm not necessarily always saying that we should plant churches in Germany amongst refugees like we did that in Turkey or like we did that in Iran. Mm-hmm. I mean, these are two different contexts. So in Iran, there is no established church. I mean, the institutional church was shut down years ago. So the only way you can operate in Iran or in Afghanistan is to have a local church that's in a home. It's the only thing possible. So when we do church planting in Iran or Afghanistan, it looks very different than it looks here.
Right.
Because here you have freedom and you have churches. And so it's not always this. I don't want to take the idea that what we did in Iran, we're just going to transfer over. What we're doing in Afghanistan, we're just going to transfer over here to Germany, because your context really means that you have a lot of flexibility to do what your church thinks is biblically wise. So yes, I do believe church planting is the hope of the future, but it's the hope of the future in every culture. And really, church planting among Germans is the only hope for Germany. Right. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't be planting churches with refugees. I think we should. But I'm just saying it's not as clear cut and easy to do like a system like we would in a place like Iran or Afghanistan, where there's no freedoms at all.
Right. I know. I mean, I understand you. But for me, we have like the fleet, if you like, or this refugee storm came 2015.
Yes.
And I know many churches tried to invite all the refugees in the churches, try to integrate them if you
Yes.
like, try to do different groups, whatever it
Sure,
is.
sure.
Try to start the churches if you like, and it,
Yeah.
in many ways it didn't work.
Yeah, that's true.
Exactly. So that's what was my question. Why should we do it again? I mean, well, my point is, I want people who's listening, and I hope there's some people outside who want to start something with
Yes.
refugees, just saying like, okay, this is why.
Right.
Not only because the Bible teaches. Yeah, it's true, but like imagine there's a pastor or congregation is like, okay, we tried, it didn't work, and they're like, okay, we quit, we have enough, and you would say like, guys, there's
Yeah.
one.
So I've heard a lot of testimonies this way, but my response is, what didn't work?
Okay.
What is it that didn't work? And what I've discovered is there was no real exit plan. There was no way to understand what does successful refugee ministry look like
Okay.
in the end. So for some, the objective was integration. Like for some, the way you say refugee work is successful is because they all became Germans in our church.
Okay.
But I don't think that that's a healthy way to see necessarily a successful refugee ministry. If the goal of refugee ministry is just to make them German in a German church, then I think that comes in conflict with some of the biblical ideas about kingdomhood in any culture, right? So I think if that's the definition, then of course there's going to be failure, because that kind of ambition just to make them German is not possible in the few months that most German churches have tried and failed. I mean, you need to have a generational view of, if that's your goal, if your goal is to make them German, then you have to have a long-term generational goal, because it's just not going to happen in the amount of time that so many churches tried and failed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I want to apologize to anybody who will feel how do you say, objected? No, with my statement. I mean, there's some churches who did great job and they're still working great, but I know some people get a little bit frustrated. But so the reason why I invited you is because you have a strategy.
Yes.
Like saying, how can we do it?
Yes.
And so that's why I want to
Yeah.
hear, and I want people to hear as well, and I hope they will get connected to you if
Yeah,
they want to
of
start
course,
something
yeah.
with the ministry. So you, like we said, okay, why, biblical principles as well, and then just helping to understand, people need Jesus and need to understand how it works. But again, now how?
Right.
Like if somebody will call you like, hey Dave, we want to do some
Yeah.
work with refugees or start a church plant, tell me how to do it.
So we have a 5-step kind of vision towards church planting, and I don't think it's necessarily for refugees. I think anybody could use it, but it's particularly helpful for cross-cultural work. So you start with entry, and entry means that you are a German culture church, and you're going to find out where are the refugees in our community. If your goal is to reach refugees, then you've got to find out where they are, what their demographic is. Are they what kind of refugees are we talking about? Are we talking about Arabs? Are we talking about Iranians, Afghans? And when you say Arab, are they North African Arab? Are they Middle Eastern Arab? Are they Iraqis? I mean, every one of those that I mentioned are different cultures. And so the first thing you have to ask is, who are the refugees in our area? And that's an entry question. We're entering into the field of our ministry. And there's a lot of ways to do that. You can go to the government. The government will give you that information. The Bund will say, here are the locations of Heims or some kind of work that they're doing. The government provides that information, so that would be helpful. Sometimes you can just get in your car and you can drive around your city and you can I would look for restaurants, markets, and places to get a haircut. I don't know about you, but everywhere I go in Zentrum, everywhere where there's a little haircut place, they are run by refugees, right? It's just normal.
I came today from one.
There you go. So you just go and find places where you can identify what kind of refugees are there. Look at the script on the signs.
Right.
You know what script is being used, and Arab script and Farsi script and Dari script use basically the same scripts. You're not going to know. So what you're going to have to do is ask. You have to say, what kind of store are you, and to begin building a relationship with your community to find out what kind of people you have. And it really depends too, is if you're in Gizon, where there's a processing center, there are 3,000 or 4,000 refugees in a processing center every day.
Oh, wow.
But they're allowed to come out. And so the strategy for that would be different because they're transitional. They're going to be there 8 weeks, 10 weeks, and then Germany's going to ship them all over the country. Well, that strategy looks different than here, where this is the final destination for a lot of strategies. They're refugees. They're living in a Heim, and they're being processed locally, and they're probably going to be here the rest of their lives. Right. And then after the Heim, they've been placed permanently. So, where you live, the answer to your question, how do we reach them? Well, that really depends on where they are in the process. Right. And if you're talking about a Heim, then that's a longer term ministry opportunity. Or if they've moved into an apartment and they're beginning their lives, they've finished their apprenticeship, they're working in in a local store or whatever. Now I've got a lot of time to build a relationship that looks different than some of these other scenarios. So I think the entry part is, where are they and how are they? How are they located? What are they doing in this refugee process? And another thing you can do is create opportunities to meet them. Mm-hmm. And there's just so many ways. Our team goes to a Heim, and we do a big party where we do a cookout, and we do games with the kids, and we sometimes cut hair for free, or we give German lessons. We partner with local German churches, and they provide the German lessons, they provide the haircuts, we provide the teams that come out and play games, and we create opportunities for local German churches to interact with their refugee communities. Right. And for them to really sit down and not just dump the gospel on top of them, but to just find out their story. The most effective thing you can do is sit down with a cup of tea and say, tell me how you got here. Tell me about your life. What's going on? And so many refugees long just to tell their stories. Mm-hmm. And some of those stories are terrible. They've had traumatic experiences throughout their journey. And some of them have lost children. Some of them have been separated from their families for months and sometimes years. Everybody brings this story with them that's kind of a burden to them. And for a Christian to sit down and say, here's some brat. Here, or if they're Muslim, I wouldn't give them a brat. Here's a hamburger, and here's some tea. Talk to me about what's going on in your life. Right. And for them to be able to open up and share, what a great ministry. One entry thing that we do is we train churches on how to do trauma care, where you help, and this is particularly addressed to women because women usually bear up under the most trauma on the journey. There's a lot of sexual abuse that goes on in their journey, or if they lose children, there's a lot of pain that they have. Islam is not kind to women as a rule, and so they already bear up under some of these things. Physical abuse is a normal part of many Muslim women's life, particularly Afghan women. So they feel the weight of trauma that they've experienced in their life. And what we do is we hear their stories, and rather than giving them advice on how to manage trauma, we just lay biblical stories alongside of them. Say, that sounds very similar to something that Jesus did or something in the scripture that talks about. We just share the stories, and we just let the stories walk alongside and nourish them along the way. And we found that to be very, very effective. You're just showing basic love and care for them as humans, not trying to convert them into a faith. Just, you're a human. God loves humans. He created them. And so we want to show love to you this way. So those are, what I'm giving you is entry type of experiences. Okay. We do a henna training where you can draw the story of the scripture in the style of the old henna drawings from the Arab and Persian world. And it's great because as you're drawing on their hands, as a woman draws we would enter mix, a woman touches a woman, men touch men.
Right.
So the woman, as the woman's touching and drawing the story, another woman is telling the story in their language. And henna lasts about 2 weeks. So they've got this 2-week witness on their hands. And it's great because it's the first time, sometimes it's the first time Afghan women have ever been touched meaningfully and tenderly and appropriately in any kind of relationship. And so it builds this bridge where there's open. Again, we're not trying to trick them into the kingdom, we're not trying to pull a fast one, trying to trick them. What we're doing is showing tenderness and love and respect, just like Jesus does, and invite them to hear why we show them respect because of our gospel story, our narrative, and invite them to do that. So all the things I'm talking about, these are all entry, where you're just creating ways in your community to build relationships with refugees in some way.
So the second one will be?
The second one is evangelism.
Okay.
And evangelism is a much more intentional sharing of the gospel. So when you share the henna story, it might be the gospel, or it might just be a Bible story that kind of introduces the gospel to them. But we defined evangelism as the explanation of the life, death, resurrection of Jesus, and give them a chance to respond to that. So, playing volleyball or feeding them at a party or playing soccer with their kids, that's not evangelism. Or if you give them a Bible or if you give them some kind of material, that's great. That's not evangelism. Or if we spend time in their home and listen to their story and pray for them, that's great, but that's not evangelism. That's all entry. Evangelism is when you stop and you say, I want to tell you the narrative of who Jesus is, what he did, and why it's important to you. Okay. And we have to make those distinctions, right? That's really important. Now, when you go back to entry, the reason the demographic is important is because evangelism has to take on the cultural context. So for an Iranian typically is more educated. They typically are quicker to learn language. Mm-hmm. You just told me a second ago, you were impressed how Iranians tend to speak German very quickly and very well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Iranians are really good at adapting to their new culture. They're smart about that. And so sharing the gospel with an Iranian where you say, here's a Bible, read this, that works better than an Afghan woman who hasn't ever had formal education. She may not even know how to read her own language. Right. And so the evangelism tools need to match the demographic, the culture of who you're interacting with. And so a lot of mistakes that churches make, and the United States is the same way, is we create events and we just give them Bibles and we say, go read the story of Jesus. Well, aside from not being readers, I don't know how to start. I mean, start with the Bible. It's a big book. Where do I begin? I don't understand. This book of Leviticus is crazy to me, So it's not a helpful tool just to hand them a Bible. So you really need cultural adjusted tools that allow you to enter into their world and walk alongside of them as they hear the life, death, resurrection of Jesus, and then give them a chance to respond to that in faith.
I gave a friend from Iraq, I gave him a Bible, and it was in German and Arabic. No, it's Arabic, right?
Yeah.
And so one day I came and he said, like, I said, did you try to read? And he's like, I need to wash my hands. I have to
Yes,
clean
yes,
myself
yes.
before I read the book.
Exactly.
And, it's just a holy place and
Yes.
blah, blah, blah. So it was excuses. I knew it was just excuses, But then I thought, okay, they have really a lot of respect from the books,
Exactly,
And so,
exactly.
but then they kind of misuse it, if you like, not to read
Absolutely.
the Bible. And then I thought, okay, this is exactly what you said. This is not the way. I mean, we need to find another way.
Yeah, that's
methods to
exactly
help
right.
them.
That's a great illustration. Their view of the holy book is the words themselves have power. The words are almost a magical
Right.
thing. When you walk into a Muslim's home, the Quran will sit on a shelf and it'll be the highest book in the house. And you try to put it in a place where people can walk under it so that the power, the blessing of the book will come over it. Well, we don't believe any of those things about the Bible. We don't believe that it's magical.
What? You don't?
And we don't have it. It's not the highest book in my bookshelf. We don't assign the same kind of qualities to the Bible
Right.
as they do to the Quran. So you're wise to go back and say, well, we're going to have to think of a new way to engage Arabs into that book, because just handing them the book will really reinforce ideas that they already have about about a holy book. So that's a good illustration.
So if anybody who's listening now is like, okay, I'm in step 2, I want to do evangelism with my refugees or my people in the church, so they can call you and say like, Dave, we need your help. Give me some methods.
On Persians,
Okay.
for sure on Persians.
Right.
And what's great about Germany is you have a lot of alliances and organizations that do specific ministry to specific people groups. So there's a lot of resources available, and you just accessing that would be great. One thing that will help Germans, I think, is that Germans are going to have to be cross-cultural minded.
Okay.
And I know that in your culture, really, in my culture, it's harder. It's hard too, but making cultural compromises in order to build a bridge to share the gospel, I think is tough.
Right. Yeah.
So that means that hospitality, because the Eastern culture is so strong in hospitality. It's really the way they measure people,
Right.
is how hospitable they are, and so there are going to be some bridges that every culture is going to have to make. I mean, that's absolutely, there's a humility that comes with cross-cultural learning or cross-cultural ministry. And some of the things, when we talked about at the beginning, how these churches tried refugee ministry, well, what some of these mean is, we stood over here and we said, come to us.
Right.
Come do all the cross-cultural work. You just cross over and just be a part of us. But really, we know biblically that incarnational ministry means that you have to live out your faith there. You got to go there. There's got to be some kind of compromise. Right. And I know how Germans feel about their kitchens. I mean, I know that that's become kind of a metaphor for cleanliness and order and all this, and that's fine. But Eastern cultures may not have the same kind of standards, or they may not see organization and cleanliness in the same way that Germans do. And so that will create conflicts. There'll be a lot of conflicts in the work. And so really the goal is not to say, well, let's keep coming over. The goal is, well, how much can I compromise? Where can I meet in the middle? And can we walk alongside of each other to know? And that doesn't mean that you just pitch them the keys to your kitchen and say, trash it and just do whatever you want and we'll clean it up. That doesn't mean that either. Yeah. It means finding some compromise, building some bridges, building relationships, and walking together.
My eye-opener was, we work with refugees, people from Tajikistan and people from Iraq. And that was like a few months ago maybe. I went to visit them, my friends again, and we gave them tables and chairs. You come in and you don't find any chair and any table there. They're still sitting on the floor.
Yeah, that's right.
Anything. And I think I love it. I mean, it's a fun. I mean, I love to come and visit and sit there, but I can do it for a month or a week. But that's their lifestyle, and it doesn't seem that they want to change. And for myself, it was like, okay, they don't have to be, eating at the table. I mean, that's
Exactly.
their culture. That I have to accept it, and it's something. There's a beauty in it, and
Absolutely.
so being on the, and a few years ago, I went to after Ramadan. When Ramadan finished,
yes.
the last day of the
Yes,
celebration.
yes, yep.
So the neighbor invited me. Well, I asked him. I invited myself. I was like, hey, I wanna see what's gonna happen this night. How do you celebrate this? And he was even willing me to take my camera and take pictures.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, come over. We eat and we celebrate, and that was a very interesting moment just to see how. And again, without chairs, without table, everything
Right.
on the floor, with the kids. Everybody's
That's right.
going around.
That's right.
So it's really interesting. Okay, so the third tip will be, or third step will be.
Well, as you've done evangelism and people respond to the gospel, then your church has some decisions to make.
Okay.
In my theological approach, if a church baptizes somebody, they're responsible for them. And so, if you choose to baptize a refugee into your church, you are responsible for discipleship. And so that means that you have to think through what's the best model to do that for somebody that's cross-cultural. Mm-hmm. And some of the same rules that you apply in evangelism, you apply in discipleship. You have to think about, are they readers, what their language is. What I've seen happen, and I've been guilty of this myself, is we assume too much.
Okay.
So when they come to faith, we treat them like we would in our own culture. So the United States, somebody comes to faith. My culture is like Germany. We have Christmas, we have Easter, we have holidays that the culture learns about the gospel. They may not accept it, but they know. I mean, most people at least know what Easter is. Some guy named Jesus, the churches come together and they raise from the dead. They don't know anything about it, but they know that.
Yeah.
Jesus came to earth and was born, Virgin Mary. They know that. So, but Muslims have none of that information, or if they do, all of their information has came from Islam.
Right.
And so they really need a lot of gospel clarity, So what you have Ascension Day here in Germany, right? Ascension Day, where Jesus goes up into heaven.
Yes.
And, yeah, I mean that idea of Jesus is still a man in heaven, part of the Trinity. That's craziness for Muslims, So the amount of distance you have to travel to help on basic discipleship is much greater than you would in your own culture.
Okay.
So discipleship is going to be a little bit gray on when is the transition from following Jesus. Are they making a decision to follow Jesus, baptizing, and then pushing them into the life of the church? You're going to have to make some decisions that are different than you would a German.
Okay.
So in my experience, we were talking about classes. You have a baptismal class. You have some kind of discipleship class to get them ready for baptism. That's going to need to look different for a refugee, for a Muslim. I mean, those basic things about our faith, you're going to have to provide a lot more basic things before you can baptize them, I think. We were laughing, I think before the started, we were talking about baptismal certificates,
Right.
And how baptismal certificates become a motivation for people to get baptized. So I don't recommend baptismal certificates, but I think we were talking about how, but now we're treating them as second-class citizens because Germans get them, but we're not going to give them to refugees. And I think that's probably the best thing, is that it's not that they're second class, but their process of discipleship demands a set of information, a set of a process that's just different than it is for Germans. And so your church in its wisdom is going to have to think about, when a person says, I want to follow Jesus, and they're going to get baptized, you have to begin to think through, well, what's missing in their discipleship that wouldn't be missing if it was a German?
Right.
And you really have to work through that. In my opinion, in my own theology, this is my personal theology, it's not across the board for everybody, but I feel like baptism should precede Lord's Supper. that you should come to faith, be baptized, and then that baptism is your entry into the local church. And then once you're in the local church, you can participate in the Lord's Supper. But, if you're going 6 months between the time they come to faith and the time they get baptized, you let them do the Lord's Supper. And really, that's a thing that every church is going to have to think through.
Okay.
Is how do we manage those basic discipleship things? And I think I would go on the side of a little bit more caution, a little bit more time, a little bit more process, a little bit more clarity before I would bring them in fully as a member of the church. They are, biblically they are,
Right.
but they don't bring a great deal of understanding into the local church like a German would.
Right.
And so if you're not careful, that will complicate ministry further down. So discipleship needs to have the same kind of things. You're thinking through the cultural barriers and how do we overcome that. Iranians and Afghans and Arabs, they've all their lives they've processed spiritual things through their own mother tongue.
Yeah.
And so when you say, we're going to celebrate our justification this morning, and you do that in German, they have no idea. There's not a word for justification. So,
Okay.
so many of the Christian words that you take for granted
Yes.
in your church, they don't even have in their language. So even if you translate it, those guys have to kind of work around it, explain around those terms. Well, that becomes complicated. And so discipleship really needs to take place in their original language, their home
Okay.
language.
Okay.
Because it could happen in German, but it's unlikely that they're going to be able to grow and clarify in their own language. You're going to have to find a way to get them the things that they need in their language, in Dari or in Persian, in Farsi, so that they can process it in a way that they've always understood spiritual language. Look, every Muslim has spiritual language, right? They've gone to the mosque, they've read the Quran, they have spiritual language. They just don't have Christian spiritual language. So a lot of them will process Christian things through Islamic language, the only thing they have. So we have to be able to come back and undo some of the things that they've had that are wrong, and then we have to give them things that they don't have at all.
Okay.
And that makes discipleship slower
Right.
and more intentional. And so the expectation of pushing them into a worship service where you're speaking in German, if you think that they're going to glean from that service the kind of things they need to grow in your faith, it's just not going to happen.
Interesting.
So when we talk about 2015, I think what happened in some instances is that churches forced this generation to get into German as quick as possible. But in doing so, there have been 5 years where they haven't developed the language of discipleship. And so we lose them, or we can't find them.
Right.
And or it's a disaster,
Right.
And so I think that explains a lot of the problems that we've seen in the German church. What do you think that's an accurate view, or is this
Yeah.
new? Is this new to you?
Well, it's in many ways it's new, and what we talked about before we started recording, that I said that the discipleship, we need to refine it as well. It's not about
Yes.
Being in a class and just
Yes.
learning things
Yes.
with your head. It's more about living. It's a lifestyle, and so we as German need to understand it. Or going back to the roots and saying, okay, it's more of a lifestyle than just
Yes.
the classes. I learned
right.
something, but then how do I apply it in my life? Every day, my day life. It's the same with the refugees now. I think we have as a church the opportunity, learning this from refugees, the
Yeah,
fellowship,
absolutely,
and going in a
absolutely.
fellowship,
Yeah.
and how we learn it, and then teach them. Yeah, it's right. I think it's a challenging. That's what I would say.
It is a challenge.
And but in the same way, like we have, take out this pace. The pace that we have sometimes, just
Yes.
go. So
Yes,
like, hey, look,
yes.
this is about life, and it's gonna, stay there for the rest of your life. If
Yes.
you want to be a follower of Christ, that's gonna be the rest of your life.
That's
So
right.
we kind of have to slower. But I think the problem is in Germany. Maybe, well, I'm not speaking for everybody, but I think sometimes if I'm not fast enough, they maybe lose their interest.
Right.
Or maybe, so we need to give them everything,
Right.
they need to learn it, everything and understand everything. So they kind of will keep on going, they will still in the church instead of saying like, okay, we need to trust Holy Spirit, we need to trust in Jesus that
Yes.
He is building these people and building this congregation of this, this church, and we just need to kind of support it, but
That's
not
right.
running it, if you like.
That's right.
I mean, theoretically sounds good. I think when we with some refugees who entered our church, we were excited, and it was like, Muslims coming to church and,
Sure.
celebrating with that. And then, I think there were a lot of curiosity
Yes.
because they never seen the church. And then funny thing has happened when they started the language courses or find work,
Yes.
they kind of lose the interest in the church because they could stay here. And so now I think for us, for myself as well, we need to start this with the first steps and okay,
Yes.
God, do you want us to start a church
Yes.
with refugees or some work with refugees? We need to come out and see where the connections are, where the
Exactly.
people are, and then starting doing the next steps.
I like the way you started that. You said, you corrected yourself. Do we need to start a church with refugees? And then you said, well, do we need to start a work with refugees? And I think that's the better approach. Do I believe in church planting? I told you, yes, I believe it. But we should really start with just the work.
Okay.
And not worry about the church yet. We'll get into that later. But for now, where are they? And who are they?
Right.
And how can we share the gospel with them and just get them into a community and just begin to grow them in the faith? Can we just start there
Right.
and then talk about the church planting aspect later on? I have a funny story. I won't tell you where it is. It's not in your country. But we had a church that the church did church refugee work. The Persians came to their church, pretty big numbers, and this pastor was teaching and preaching in that language, and the Persian was translating. The problem is that Persian didn't really have a strong grasp of that language.
Okay.
And so he was a pretty new believer. And so if he didn't understand what the German or the pastor said, he just made stuff up and just began to talk. And so the church felt good about its ministry because they had the event. But because they didn't really understand the culture or the language or have somebody
Right.
that could really connect and have a relationship, that for, I think this was 3 years, 2 or 3 years, this guy was just teaching them everything that was in his head. It was nonsense. It was craziness. He just was essentially preaching what he knew about the Bible, which was very, very little, and just talking. And so for 3 years went by, and these people were terribly misled and misunderstood the scripture. So it stresses the importance that someone like you, if you're a pastor, if they're coming to your church, you have a responsibility to slow things down and to build a relationship and to say what's really happening in this group and take the time to move them along in discipleship slowly. So
Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, so the fourth point will be
the fourth is I kind of combine it. It's church planting and leadership development. And at this point, you as a pastor have a decision to make. You got to decide. It's really more of a spectrum. You have to decide what is your church going to do about their spiritual condition.
Okay.
And the spectrum goes like this. You could just give them your space. You could say, here's a Sunday school class, or here's the fellowship hall. We're giving it to you for free. On Sundays, you go gather people, do your thing, and leave. We don't have any responsibility for you. We're just providing a location. And maybe you charge them rent, maybe you don't, but you're just providing the building. That's the first kind of part of the spectrum. The second part would be a gradual relationship, some kind of relationship with that group. So maybe they're meeting and you're meeting with them on a regular basis and kind of mentoring them to develop them, to come alongside of them. And then then the end of the spectrum is, where is this headed? is your goal when they meet, is your goal to make a church with them? Are you wanting to birth a church where they've come into your fellowship hall and they've met for a time, you've mentored them, and after a period of time, you're saying, okay, you're a church? Or is the goal to get them into your church where they're integrated as Germans? So I'm not going to judge. I mean, it's not my responsibility to tell you what you should and shouldn't do. But whatever you choose, you have to have a plan. It's not going to naturally, it just won't naturally work. And maybe this was happened in 2015 is the assumption was if we can get refugees into a place and gather them together, they'll just naturally become a church.
Right.
Or they'll just naturally integrate into the German church. Well, both of those things are crazy. They're not going to naturally do anything. They don't have, for one thing, one of the big problems in church planting is they look at you and your church and they think that's the goal. Right? So you've got a German, you've got an Iranian that maybe only became a believer 3 years ago. And what generally happens is if he has a little bit of German, he becomes the leader.
Right.
Like the German goes, oh, the pastor says, oh, that guy speaks German. And so I'm just naturally going to choose him to be the leader. Well, that's a terrible decision. You don't have any idea. And what's worse about the Persians is as soon as somebody's declared a leader, there's a whole system culturally that kind of grows up around that process.
Okay.
And it's very unhealthy. You know, Iranians have been a monarchy for 2,500 years. So the way they think through leadership is king, people.
Right.
Well, we both know that's a terrible system in a church. The last thing the New Testament tells you is to build a kingdom in a church, and you're the king and everybody's your subjects. That's terrible. But that tends to be the model that Iranians gravitate to. And so as soon as you kind of declare this person is the leader, you're going to have all kinds of trouble. That person may not be qualified. Maybe that guy, like we had in one place where that guy was living with his girlfriend. And he was kind of the church leader.
And said she's my sister.
Well, nobody knew.
Nobody
knew. Because nobody was asking the questions about the character of this leader. Right. So if your goal is to develop a church within your church, if you're looking for starting a church and I think that's a noble, wonderful thing, but you're going to have to take responsibility for mentoring. You're going to have to first find out who the leader is that meets the biblical qualifications. And then you're going to have to develop that leader character-wise and biblically, and just the method of leadership that the Bible teaches. Servant leadership and all those things are new to the Persian world.
Okay.
And so this is why I say it's got to be a plan, and you really don't develop your church planting plan until you've gathered the group together and you kind of get a feel for where this is headed. It may not be the best thing to start a local church at that moment. It may be best for you to keep that group inside your church as like a Bible study or a fellowship or a Sunday school or a small group or a life group, whatever, and just maintain that relationship like that until you see in their group growth, maturity, and then you may say, hey, I see that guy over there. He's been faithful. He seems to meet the biblical qualifications of pastoral leadership. And if somebody steps forward, or if you identify that, then you can start the process. Okay, well, what does it look like for us to develop a local church here, an independent church? But, brother, that's complicated.
Don't say this word complicated. It's not good. Say it's cool. It's great. We need to encourage people.
I was in another country, not your country, but I was in another country, and I sat with somebody, and they called me Pastor David. And I said, well, really, I'm not a pastor anymore. You know, I'm a worker, a missionary. I'm not a pastor. But my friend right here, he's an Iranian. He's been a pastor for 20 years, and he just graduated with his master's degree in theology, and he's smart, and he is a great Bible teacher. And when you address him, you should call him pastor, and you should call me just David. And in that meal that we had, she called me Pastor David 20 times. And she never called him pastor. And it taught me a lesson that because he's a refugee, he was never going to be respected as a pastor.
Crazy.
Even though his church was as big as that person's church. But because he's a refugee, he just didn't, in that person's eyes, there wasn't equality.
Right.
How big is your church?
Oh, 20, I don't know, 500,000 people.
500 people? No.
We're a small church. I don't know.
How big is your church? 100 people? 120?
No, less.
75.
45?
45 people. So what if somebody was sitting next to you, and because your church was small, I never called you pastor. I only called him pastor because this church was 100 or 500. I mean, you would say, look, that's not the biblical. Those addresses don't work.
Right.
We don't use that kind of system to manage who can be a pastor and who not. But for this person, the color of the skin, their background, the size of their church, all determined if they could be a pastor or not. Well, if you as a pastor are going to view a refugee like that, it will never be successful.
Right.
They'll always be kind of looked down on. They'll always be kind of second class citizens. And I think this is what Paul was so angry about in 1 Corinthians 11 when he talked about the Lord's Supper, that you have this group in chapter 11, you have these people that were the top society or the rich people. They were coming and treating everybody, eating the food and treating everybody like they were still lower in society. And Paul says, that's why some of you are dead, because in the gospel, it doesn't work that way. God took your life, and some of you got sick because you brought this cultural view that I'm high and you're low based on things that the Bible says are not important. And hopefully God doesn't do that anymore. I don't think he does. I don't think that's the trend. But it is the lesson. I think James did the same thing, talking about partiality. It's so anti-gospel, right? You just don't judge people by these kind of cultural standards. You do it based on their confession. And so here we have guys that, in my opinion, really understand pastoral work. Some of these guys come out of Iran. They've been pastors for 3 or 4 or 5 churches on a high persecution environment. And in some ways, they're better equipped to be pastors than me. Because in some ways, they understand church in its truest form. And you and I, we live in a culture where we have so many layers of institutional structure and ideas that are really not even biblical. And these guys come out of really more of a biblical idea of church. And yet they come here and but sometimes we can't trust them. We don't like them as leaders. So that listen, if you're going to start a work in your church, these are the kind of things you have to deal with. You know, if you're going to start a church work, you have to really look deep and ask gospel-centered questions. Are these people like me? And if the answer is no, then you're going to have a miserable time.
Right. Well, but again, it's education. It needs time, education, and all the steps we always talk about.
Yeah.
And don't judge book by its cover.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Okay, so in the last thing, there was a more important, or the most important thing I would say.
It is the most important thing.
The 5th step.
The final step is exit. And I think for German churches, they see this this refugee ministry as for eternity, it'll be the same, right? So as soon as I bring in this person and start this work, then for the next 50 years, our church is going to be in this situation. But I think what you have to do is you have to say, we're walking through these 5 steps. On the 5th step, there's going to be a time where we move from higher to low, where you're the teacher and I'm the one that's being taught. You're the pastor and I'm the pastoral apprentice. You're the trainer. I'm the one being trained. But there's going to be a day where you say, then you're going to be the one. We're going to rely on you to take responsibility for this. We're going to treat you not as a trainee, but as a shoulder-to-shoulder partner. Mm-hmm. And you'll you'll have authority in your group. And we're not going to do the same things that we did before, that there's going to be an end to this. And sometimes it's financial. It may be time. I mean, you may say, I'm going to develop this guy for 2 years. At the end of this 2 years, we're going to do something different. I can help with that. We have an online theological seminary for Persians that can help if you're mentoring an Iranian and you want him to have theological education in his language, then we can provide that. And then you can provide kind of the on-the-ground training for what it means to be a pastor, walk alongside of them. But at some point, you have to agree that we're going to be out of this relationship where you're depending on me for everything, and we're going to grow to a point where we're shoulder to shoulder. And exit doesn't mean that I don't have a relationship with you. It just means that it's an exit from this kind of relationship, high-low, dependency, independence. Now we're going to be more colleagues. And I'll still mentor you and I'll still help you, but the relationship is different. You're equipped. Now go, and we'll walk alongside of you some, but we're not going to have this kind of same relationship. And I think that maybe that was the big mistake in 2015. There wasn't an exit.
Right.
Or the exit was, it's not working, let's just put him into German. Well, that's not an exit. That's not an exit strategy. That's a reaction. And we really need to start with the question, what does this refugee ministry look like 5 years from now that we can say is successful?
Okay.
And that's what we're striving for. So the exit is really ultimately your final goal. And, I'm not the one that makes that call. Every church is different, and every context is different, and every circumstance is different. And so you, as the pastor, have to have the wisdom to know what's the best situation for us in this time. And some of that's driven by your own denomination. If you're in a Lutheran or Methodist or some other kind of structured denomination, then your Persian work may be that you put them in that in that system, that denominational system, and that system decides if they're trained or not. And so you may have a denominational system that looks different. So again, it's not my job to tell you if that denominational system is proper in equipping your pastors or not. I don't know.
Well, I think even, we going kind of very high, like, church plant or church and then pastor and whatever. But I think you can start like saying, okay, we want to do in 2 years, establish a small group for Iranis or Iraqis. So like, okay, the goal is, that these people can meet, and we have a guy that we invested in. And so one day these people invest in their people or invite their people.
Exactly.
So the church is kind of backing up. It's like, okay, we equip people or, help them to become a follower of Christ. And then now they go to their people and try to evangelize and talk to them. And so I think that's going to be a smaller strategy. It's not only like always, we start something with refugees, the end goal is church. No, maybe it's just a small group. Maybe it's bookstore, whatever it is, It's like, say like you have a goal, small goal, not too big maybe in the beginning. And
I think that's wise. I think that every church can do something. And I shouldn't feel the pressure from another church to do what they're doing.
Right.
Partnership can be an important thing, where maybe two churches come together and say, let's work together on this. I think I said before, Iranians will look at you and they'll say, well, your church is our goal. Well, that's a terrible idea. They're Persian. They shouldn't. I want to say to all Germans, if you haven't heard anything we've said on this podcast, I want you to listen to this. Look, if you'll just be patient with the first generation, you'll get the second generation.
That's true.
The first generation is going to struggle to learn language, or struggle to leave their culture. That generation is the one that's most tied to their culture. But their children, according to German law, their children are going to go to German school. Now, what I've discovered in the refugee world is there's a certain amount of fear that comes with going into a new culture. I'm a Muslim, or I have a Muslim background. I'm an Iranian or an Afghan, and I don't want my kids to lose the culture that's our family culture. You know, there's a real fear of that.
Right.
So they force their kids to stay tied to their culture in various ways. I'm not saying everybody does it, but generally there's a lot of struggle in this first generation about what are our kids going to be? Are they going to be German, or are they going to be Afghan? And so there's a real struggle there. So typically what happens is you start a Persian work, and generally the mom and dads will say to the kids, you have to come here. Well, that's fine, but over time, they won't develop Christian language from their parents. They'll develop Christian language from their German. Their German will be the language of processing spiritual things. So there's this tension in the second generation. What I think would help is if we could help mentor the first generation and say, look, do some stuff with your kids in Farsi, but bring them to German Sunday school class. Let them develop their spiritual language in German, because when they grow up, they're going to speak German. They're going to be more German than you are. And if you don't do that, you're going to lose this generation. This generation will be caught between. They won't have the Persian skills to manage spiritual talk, and they won't have the German skills to do it, and they'll be lost. So if you can help this generation let them be Persian, but then help nurture them for the second generation, help that second generation be German, then by the time you get to the third generation, you're in. You've won. So I say to German churches, be patient.
Right.
They'll come along, but you're going to have to let this first generation kind of manage that. And then the second generation will be your bridge. You'll have somebody that has the skills to still reach out to refugees, but has the knowledge of how to be in a German context. Right. And they'll be your missionaries to the refugee community. You just have to be patient. It's not going to happen in this generation. It's not going to happen in 6 months,
right,
which is what's happening. You know, you just shove them into German church in 6 months, and we lose everybody that way. So keep the first generation intact in some way. Work with the second generation, and by the third generation, you'll be the winners.
Yeah. And I think we need patience, like you said, and then building relationship. That's an important thing.
It's huge.
Not only like doing events and trying to convince them, but more building relationship and be patient and pray for them and invite them still and be part of their lives. You need to. I think we need to find out how can I be a part of their life, in their lives as well. And I think
that's right.
The fellowship and hospitality, all the things play. And the time, you have to invest your life into these people, and that's the most.
And they have to too. I mean, we're not saying that they don't have any responsibility. No. We're not saying that at all. Right. They have to compromise. They have to build the bridge too. Particularly if they're Christians, they have an obligation to do that. Love one another. That's, right. I mean, that's the biblical directive, right? So Afghans will have to say, how do we love Germans? But they're visitors in your country. They're the ones under the suffering. So really, the Germans have the first step. They're the ones that they come the furthest in compromise, and they help walk that process more slowly, intentionally. I can't stress enough. The cultures are so different. When we first came to Germany, we went for a place that had Arabic script, and we wanted to eat a lunch. So my wife and I said, let's go there. They've got Arabic. So we went in. They were actually Kurdish, and we sat down with them, and we speak some Turkish, and so I talked to them a little bit in Turkish, and I said, well, how do you like this country? And they say it's a really good country. The people are cold. So I understood what he means. Right. Germans are not cold. We have we love our German neighbor. We think you guys are great. But I understand from an Arab or Central Asian perspective that they don't know how to make those adjustments. We have experience in that, but they don't know. And so from their perspective, you're just cold people. And I think you have a chance to say, well, maybe our culture has some difficulties relating, but we're not just Germans, we're followers of Jesus. And so we're going to show a different kind of love that you've not seen out of the culture. Again, I don't think that that's a fair assessment of your culture. I don't think it's fair at all. But from their perspective, it's the way they're viewing it, right? And so because of that, you say, okay, well, we're going to go the extra step. We're going to do the extra thing to be able to show them that we're not cold. Not cold because we're German, because we're followers of Jesus. Is that pretty clear?
Perfect.
Yeah.
And the one thing,
so I've alienated your entire podcast audience, and they're saying, "What's are you calling us that?" I'm really not.
The last one thing. My first question was, why church? I mean, why should we start any of these works? And I think the more important thing for me is because Jesus is bringing those people in our context, and I think that's. I mean, you can. How do you say? Deny it.
No.
God is bringing all these people, countries we can't go.
Right. That's right.
So they come over here, and we have this opportunity. And you told me like this, something happening in Iran, in Afghanistan, the church was growing, and
it is.
In Iran, church was growing, and so these people are now leaving their country, coming here, and I think we have this great opportunity to share the gospel.
An incredible opportunity. You really do. For the first time, Islam does not allow for a competing worldview. It persecutes every competition in worldview. But that's not the way we as Christians are.
Right.
We don't persecute other worldviews. We invite. We say, come, let's talk about worldviews. Let's talk about the problems that you see with us in our worldview, and we'll identify where we think in your worldview is really not true, and let's have a dialogue. We're very free to talk about differing worldviews. Well, in Islam, that's not possible. So for the first time, Afghans and Iranians are coming out of a context. For the first time, many of them are experiencing a worldview that they've never seen before. And so you have an opportunity to present to them a real biblical worldview. And the truth is, brother, in Germany, the worldview of Germany is secularism. It's humanism. That's the worldview of Germany. It's not Christian.
Right.
And so whether they like it or not, that's the worldview that's the competing worldview. I've come out of Afghanistan with Islam, and I come to Germany, and here's humanism. You have a chance to say, yeah, well, humanism doesn't work either. Here's the worldview that works. Here's the worldview that's true. I asked a girl, Iranian, I said, how do you like Germany? She said, I really like it. And I said, well, you've heard about Christianity. What do you think? She says, I really love the Christian message. It just makes me feel so good. And I said to her, Christianity is not good because it makes you feel good. Christianity is right. It's true. And so I told her the reason Christianity works is because Jesus rose from the dead. And so that's what you have to come to grips with. You have to ask yourself, is this true or not? Not, is it a better culture than mine? Is it nicer? Are the people nicer? Are they warmer? That's not the issue. The issue is, did Jesus rise from the dead or not? Is it true or not? And so for the first time, you have an opportunity to say, Jesus rose from the dead. He died on the cross, rose from the dead for your sins, so you can have a right relationship. Is this true or not? Do you believe this is true or not? And if you don't believe it's true, then why not? How can we talk about that? They just don't have that opportunity that they do now here. God bless Germany. God bless this country. What a wonderful country, and what a wonderful opportunity you have.
Okay. Great. Dave, thank you very much. I think we had a lot of conversation, a lot of ideas. We shared a lot of ideas, a lot of things that people can learn. And down below there's a link. I think we will put the link so people can relate and can connect to you. And I hope people will call you and ask you for advice. So too. And I think we need to do another podcast.
Man, let's do
just to talking about about Iranian people and about the culture and all the things, because you know so many things, and I would love to learn.
Let's do it.
Okay, thank you very much again.
My pleasure.
And, have fun listening to this, and I hope you learn something. See you later. Bye.
God bless.